Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're very excited to have Chris Bonello with us tonight. Chris is an autistic advocate, award-winning writer, and international speaker, also a novelist and special needs tutor. He was formerly a primary school teacher. In 2015, he launched Autistic Not Weird to share his insights from both a personal and professional perspective, a venture which has seen him attract 126,000 Facebook followers. And if you don't follow him, you should, because it's quite a good page. And over 2 million page hits on his website, which is autisticnotweird.com, as well as speaking engagements as far away as India and the Sydney Opera House. He is the author of the novel series Underdogs, a series of dystopia books with heroes from a special school, and What We Love Most About Life, an uplifting book designed to help autistic young people feel less alone. He was a nominee for the 2017 National Diversity Awards, Positive Role Model for Disability, two-time winner at the Autism Hero Awards, top journalist of 2017 and online social community for 2018, and won the National Autistic Society Professionals Award for Outstanding Achievement by an Individual on the Autism Spectrum in 2019. So we are very excited to have you, Chris, and I will turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you. I had no idea how long my short biography actually was. I've never actually read it out loud before. I've heard anyone else read it. Now you know. Okay, so how many people? Okay, that's cool. So.
And just real quick to everyone who's watching, you're not going to be able to vocally ask Chris any questions, but when we are all done, or even during, if you have questions, we can put them in the chat box that's down at the bottom of your screen, and at the end, we'll be sure to ask Chris all of your questions. All right, thank you, Chris.
Right, so I'm assuming this works, yeah?
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay, so yeah, as you've just heard, my name's Chris. I used to be a primary school teacher, or elementary school teacher as you call it over there. I'm now a special needs tutor, doing most of my work in a school specifically for autistic students. And in case you haven't already gathered, I'm autistic myself. And yeah, first things first, thank you very much for having me in sunny Pennsylvania. It's great to be there. And yeah, it's been a bit of a weird year, really. I've been to so many different places without literally being there. But yeah, this is me. You just heard I'm an author and a speaker and all these other things. And when I heard that biography being read out, every time I hear it, there's always this feeling of, wait, are you sure this is me we're talking about? I'm really not the kind of person I'm not supposed to, and so on and so on. But leaving aside the like self-esteem related issues that led to kind of that repeated habits, I am those things. But more than anything else, I'd like to call myself a builder of people. That's ultimately why I went into education. It was one hell of a realization actually when I was halfway through my teaching course and realized, wait, hang on, I just realized I didn't go in this to put knowledge in people's heads. I did it to help people grow and develop into the best people that they can be. So I'm very glad to be in special education, because that's allowed me to really do what I was intending to do all along as a teacher. Because yes, you put knowledge in people's heads, but the center of it all is helping build up the students as people. Anyway, yeah, for those who don't know what Autistic Not Weird is, it's basically a website that launched 5.5 years ago to discuss autism from a personal perspective and from a professional perspective. And yeah, as you just heard, it's gone surprisingly well. 127,000 Facebook followers, more than 2.5 million page hits on the website where the articles are. And yeah, as you just heard, I get to call myself an award-winning writer, an international speaker, and a published novelist. And this was not the plan. I had no intention of so many people reading my stuff. But all of those impressive words you just heard, more than anything else, what I see that as is a reflection of how many people want to learn about autism. I think that is the reason why everything's happened. and especially people are curious about hearing things from an autistic person's perspective, which can only really be a good thing. So I'm delighted that I've had some kind of, dare I say it, influence in the discussion about awareness, acceptance, and so on. Anyway, for those who haven't bothered to read the title yet, my talk is Educating Students in a 2020 Climate, because it's been a rather strange year, hasn't it? And yeah, that's a very British underestimating way of phrasing it. It's been a funny sort of year, hasn't it? But yeah, it really has. Like for me personally, in June I was going to give a speech in Melbourne, Australia, and I gave that speech from the chair in my office. I was going to go to Denmark to deliver a speech about the benefits of teaching chess to autistic children. I gave that speech in the chair in my office. I was going to go to Scotland twice. I was going to go to Ireland, and so on. And yeah, I'm glad that I still delivered those speeches. The learning still took place, and so on. But there was something missing through the lack of personal experience. And for those wondering why I'm bringing this up, it's because I am talking about online learning and why so many children in general, as well as autistic children, often struggle so much with it. Now, I'm dimly aware of the situation in America because, well, I try and avoid the news in America if I can, except, okay, I'm a bit of a hypocrite. I did wake myself up at 2 o'clock in the morning to watch a shouting match last night, and it was difficult to fall asleep after that for multiple reasons. But anyway, I am aware that in contrast to here, where the schools are completely open as normal, and you're supposed to social distance, but let's face it, no one's really social distancing, and I'm sorry to admit that, but it was never going to be possible in the first place. In America, a lot of it is still very much online learning, face-to-face, and sorry, not face-to-face, I mean literally the opposite, just learning online through a screen. And even though, dare I say it, I'm glad that if this pandemic was going to happen, I'm glad that it happened now and not 10, 15 years ago, when there would have been no possibility of doing this, and people would have reopened the schools regardless of how many people died. And yeah, so the question being, given that we're in this situation, given that it is the best we can realistically do, how can we help people access online learning? Like meaningfully access it and actually learn things that are at least comparable to a face-to-face environment. So first I'm going to talk about why it's so difficult for children in general and for autistic children, and I'm also going to talk about what helps and what doesn't help. So before we go on and talk about why children in general struggle, one observation about a lot of the advice and the insights they give is, well, that doesn't just apply to autistic people, that's just people in general. And for example, if I'm talking about coping strategies for anxiety, a lot of people say, well, yeah, this is very helpful for autistic children, but I think people in general could be helped by this. And I agree, because autistic people do have this habit of being human. And there's actually a lot more common ground between autistic people and boring people. Sorry, can't believe I just said. Actually, I can believe I just said that. No offense, some of my best friends are neurotypical. But I was going somewhere with that before I started making jokes. But yeah, there's a lot more common ground between autistic people and non-autistic people than we give them credit for. So a lot of the advice I give will apply to non-autistic people, but particularly in the cases of online learning, or in the case of anxiety, the example I gave earlier, it's very much amplified when it comes to autistic people. I mean, yes, the advice I give about anxiety may apply to the general population, but it's disproportionately more likely to apply helpfully to autistic people. With that said, I'm going to start off this by talking about why children in general often struggle with online learning. I suppose the biggest reason is that it's just not personal enough. It's the fact that, yes, you're seeing the faces that you recognize, but you're not sharing a room with them. And I don't know biologically why it makes such a difference to be in the same room as another person, even if they're at the other end of the room, but it feels real. And online learning doesn't feel quite real. And yeah, this is for children in general, but also for autistic children, even the ones who are supposed to really, really value technology and not be very keen on humans, as the stereotype goes, which is a load of bollocks, really. But by the way, this is the great thing about giving talk in America. I can call things a load of bollocks, and it's not even rude. It is extremely rude over here, but it's like if I started calling people wankers. It doesn't mean anything over there. That's I'm sorry, it's just so cathartic to use British swear words in front of people who aren't offended by them. But anyway, it is a load of bollocks that autistic children are supposed to value computers and technology more than people. We love people when we can access them, when we're allowed to socialise on our terms, and when people respect our comfort zones and so on. But yeah, even for us, we value the personal element of being in a classroom, as long as the classroom can actually accommodate us, and as long as it's a sensory-friendly environment for us and so on. It's weird, it's just nice. I'm talking about us, even though it's me talking as the teacher and not the students. It's like I'm standing up for my tribe here. Nonetheless, we value the personal approach, and yeah, a screen approach just doesn't have that personal element to it. Also, it's a constant reminder that you're not really seeing the people. Since lockdown, I've been attending church via screen, and it's been lovely to see my church friends again. And at the same time, it's a constant reminder that I'm not there. I can't hug my godchildren. I can see them. I can see blurry versions of their faces, but I can't give them a hug. And it's like, imagine if you're a young person, you're seeing Hunter for the first time in 6 months. You're seeing Jake for the first time in 6 months, but you're very nearly but not quite seeing them. It's a little tease of friendship that's just reminded, and you're supposed to be learning, by the way. You're supposed to be concentrating on the academic stuff whilst being teased by the very nearly but not quite element of socializing. And that hurts. And also, it is kind of like watching TV. So let me ask you 2 questions. First off, we kind of expect our students to feel motivated to learn when they're engaging with schoolwork, but let's be honest, how energetic do you feel when you're watching TV? Question 2, how energetic do you feel while you're playing video games? Because I am massively energetic when I'm playing Sonic the Hedgehog, hugely. Now, I know that this part of the talk is more about establishing the issue rather than providing solutions, but I think then there is kind of an idea in there. If you can make your lessons really, really interactive, which I know is massively difficult, by the way, but if you can find a way to make it interactive, then maybe you'll be engaging with children with the energy levels of gamers rather than the energy levels of those just watching TV in the evening. So moving on to, why do autistic children generally speak, as much as it is possible to generalize when it comes to talking about autism, I'm going to try, why in general do autistic children struggle with online learning? Again, 3 suggestions here. Humans seem to love the number 3 for some reason. There's this thing about the power of 3, and speaking as someone with a mathematics degree, 3 is a very overrated number numerically. You can't really do much with the number 3, but psychologically people like it. And I know I said I have a maths degree, but I promise I have a personality. But anyway, there are 3 points here. First off, sensory issues. That's the big one, which is often kind of underestimated because, okay, full confession, when I go into my school for autistic children, I often completely forget that sensory issues are a thing because I don't personally experience them. It's very easy for us to lose track of the things that don't personally impact us. And it's not through selfishness necessarily, it just neurologically, it just doesn't occur to us. Unless I notice a student who is really struggling or is disengaged in the lesson, and I start thinking, okay, is there something up with the room here? Or if someone actually says, that light's too bright, and so on, I know how to recognize sensory problems when I see them, but even I, as an autistic person, I'm fairly fortunate in the sensory departments. I don't walk into a room and think, oh, this might be sensory friendly, or this might be a problem. It's often only occurs to us if we see the problem. In fact, when it comes to face-to-face learning, one of the big sensory things is visual and audio. So imagine that you're trying to concentrate on doing your schoolwork, except you're doing it on Zoom where a lot of the voices are not audio and can't quite hear what's going on, and suddenly the volume changes will come suddenly without warning. And I'm not going to try doing an impression of blockiness and freezing, but also suddenly a light comes on in the background. It's really like, wait, I can't even angle it at the I can't do it myself artificially, but you know how suddenly the lighting changes and brightness comes and then goes, and noises come and goes, and so on, in a way that doesn't reflect real life. And real life can be terrifying enough for someone with sensory issues. For example, when I deliver training to school staff, the things to say about sensory issues are, well, I start off by saying, okay, so who can hear the whirring of that projector? Put your hands up. And a few staff members put their hands up. Okay, who can hear the buzzing of that light? And then a few more people put their hands up. And there's this grin of pride on their face, like, yeah, I can still hear that. I'm not old yet. But then I say, okay, right, so a child with sensory processing disorder, for them, that's not an achievement that they hear that. They literally don't get a choice in the matter. And that's another thing. A child with ADHD, children with ADHD are stereotypically assumed to not be able to concentrate. Now, that's really not fair. Think about it. From the brain perspective of a child with ADHD, where that buzzing light takes up just as much space in their brain as the teacher's voice does, if they can access the lesson and learn as much from the lesson as a child without ADHD, then that is one hell of a great concentrating kid you've got there. That lad or girl with ADHD may be the best concentrator in the room, but have the reputation of not being very good at concentrating because, well, ADHD kids get distracted all the time or whatever. The other thing to bear in mind is that a child with a sensory difference or sensory processing disorder may interpret lights as being brighter than they really are. And the word really is in air quotes there because, well, from their perspective, the light really is that bright. In fact, come to think of it, that kind of gives rise to a very existential question, like, which one of us has it right? I mean, objectively, scientifically, how bright is that light? We talk about children with sensory processing disorder as if, well, they've got a disorder, so they're the ones interpreting it wrong. But how do we know that everyone else's brains hasn't just, maybe in terms of evolution, hasn't just dulled down all the senses to make it easier to cope with? And the child with sensory processing disorder is the only one who's seeing the light as bright as it really is. That's something to keep you up thinking at midnight tonight. But anyway, and a child with sensory processing differences or disorder, whatever, who hears sounds, may hear the sound as being louder than most other people do. And that can be an absolute nightmare if you live in a society that has already collectively decided what the acceptable levels of brightness and noise are. So if you're hearing something that's loud and you think you're saying, no, I hate this, it's too loud, but everyone around you is saying, no, it's not, you're wrong, grow up, then again, it's incredibly unfair because, well, from your perspective, it still is too loud. You just haven't matched up with the rest of society's definition of what acceptable levels are. That is the biggest issue of being autistic, I'm afraid. The fact that being autistic itself is fine. In fact, I'm pretty biased. I think it's pretty awesome. But one thing that does kind of suck once in a while is being autistic in a world built with everyone else in mind. That there's a reason why it took me 13 interviews to get my first teaching job, and it wasn't because I wasn't a very good teacher. It was because I couldn't play the game as well as my presumably non-autistic fellow candidates. So yeah, being an autistic person in a world built for non-autistic people, especially when all the inventions were invented by either autistic people or dyslexic people, we're just not very good at getting the jobs that allow us to use those inventions. But anyway, I'm ranting. That whole point was about sensory issues. I kind of got lost along the way, but I don't really care because it was interesting, I think. Anyway, so second point. there's no separation between your work universe and your home universe. I believe that everyone has a bunch of universes. For me personally, I have my family universe, I have my work universe, I have my online universe, I have my church universe, I have my Boys Brigade universe. My Boys Brigade is a youth group over here with the people who invented the Scouts. And yeah, one of the days of my life which I remember as being the most overwhelming for me was the launch day for Autistic Not Weird, because in 2017, 2.5 years after I started the site, I was starting to devote so much time for it that it actually became my job. Thanks to my Patreon supporters, I was able to actually do it for a living, and I was able to quit the day job and then just launch Autistic Not Weird as my profession. And I had a launch day party for it, and that was the day that all of my universes collided. My family was there, my friends were there, my Boys Brigade lads were there, my church friends were there. There are people from the Netherlands there, and suddenly all of these different universes collided, and it was an amazing day, but it was so overwhelming. Now, with that in mind, put yourself in the position of a young child who is being asked, not just being asked, being expected to access the curriculum and work really hard in exactly the same chair as they play their video games in. Put yourself in the position of a young person who is being asked to experience a day at school in the same chair which they use to recover from a day at school. And thirdly, unclear expectations. One thing I forgot to say about that last point. In terms of addressing that, it really does depend on the person. You may end up finding which particular things work for which particular students, but it could be something like make sure that they use a room in the house that they don't normally use. For example, well, in my case, at that age, it probably would be my dad's office, which has now become my office since he's retired, and I've kind of stolen his room now. But again, sidetracking. But you could find a room that isn't really normally used by the child for anything, and then set that there as their workspace. So it may be unfamiliar, but at least it's not familiar in a completely different way for a completely different purpose. Anyway, the unclear expectations thing. Yeah, part of the autistic experience is just learning up the rules as you go along and learning through trial and error, getting it embarrassingly wrong a bunch of times, and then just learning how to mimic the people who aren't getting in trouble. And that involves picking up some really strange social rules. I could spend the whole talk just discussing all these weird rules that the neurotypical population seem to have made up that don't quite make sense, but we have to follow anyway. But I'm not going to waste your time with those. What I'm going to say is that when we switched to online learning, the environment changed. That means that expectations changed. I'm talking about the really subtle, unspoken rules. And suddenly, all this stuff that the students have memorized suddenly stops being relevant. Suddenly, it's not what you're supposed to do anymore. And yeah, I imagine that's quite demoralizing, going to all that effort to memorize all these really subtle rules that you're not quite sure why they're supposed to make sense, you're just supposed to do them. And after all of that, suddenly, oh no, everything has changed now. Oh, and by the way, there's a pandemic and you're supposed to be really worried. So yeah, unclear expectations are quite difficult. I'd like to finish this point before I go into what helps and what doesn't help. I had a chat with the mother of my godson, who's now 16, and last year, while the pandemic was at its peak over here, a lot of our schools were doing online learning, and he, like a lot of autistic students, just wasn't getting on with it particularly well. So instead of just me preaching everything out, I thought to give you the experience of my godson and his family. These are his mother's words. She said, because it's actually still quite difficult for him to talk about, so it's his mum's words. What she said was this, and there's quite a lot to pick apart from this. He struggled without the structure of the classroom. He needed the routine, the rules, the rigid form of doing things. I know, right? It sounds extremely autistic. While learning at home, he felt unsupported. By the way, notice That's he felt unsupported. It wasn't that he wasn't unsupported, he felt unsupported. And you can provide all of the resources for your students that you want, but it's an entirely different skill to make sure that they feel supported and valued and that you're rooting for them. He felt unsupported and doubted his own ability. Oh yeah, by the way, my godson's self-esteem issues are quite similar to a lot of other autistic people. In fact, that even now, even though he's been outside of mainstream education for 4 years, he's still kind of recovering from the damage that the mainstream system did to him. Because a lot of autistic people doubt their own abilities because they've been told to, whether directly or very subtly over plenty of years. But yeah, doubted his own ability because he was struggling to manage his own time before he even started on his work. Yeah, because the morning routine just doesn't exist. The getting up, having a shower, getting dressed, having a breakfast, getting the taxi, go to school, that just wasn't there. For some without particularly good management skills, could be roll out of bed at 8:15 and then put a shirt on and be in front of the computer, and that's it. That's your morning routine, which didn't happen, and right, that's it. Now you got to do some schoolwork. He was also missing the only social time he had, because not necessarily my godson, but a lot of autistic people, students in particular, only experience the house that they live in and the school they go to. Those are the main two places in their life. And often it's not exactly their fault. It may not even be choice. It may be anxiety about the wider world. It could be other disabilities or huge sensory issues. But yeah, he was also missing the only social time he had, so he was lonely and his mood was dropping. But again, he was expected to access the learning. He started to use avoidance, which, as we know, is never a good way to manage your workload, and it just got too much for him. Now, the thing is with avoidance, I'm not sure whether avoidance is an autism thing. I suspect it's an anxiety thing, because to be honest, avoidance does wonders in the short term. If you don't have to confront something you're nervous about, then you don't have to be nervous about it. It's great. In the long term, of course, it does a lot more harm than good, and I tell a lot of people that the best way through your anxieties is by confronting the hell out of them. I speak as someone who used to be terrified of public speaking, by the way, but I checked earlier, this is now my 86th speaking engagement. I now have the confidence to think, look, Chris, you've done this 85 times before. I think this one might actually go well. But the first time I did it, it was terrifying. Second time I did it, it was terrifying, but a bit less terrifying. Third time, it was a bit less terrifying, and so on and so on. I could go off track and give loads of advice about anxiety, but yeah, avoidance is a very understandable strategy for those going through anxiety in completely unfamiliar territory. And unfortunately, that's what happened to my godson. Anyway, so I'm now going to talk about what helps and what doesn't help. I'm going to save the positive stuff to us, so I'm going to start with what doesn't help. So first off, aiming for neurotypical behavior or neurotypical assumptions. Now, there are plenty of places I could start with this, but the one that immediately comes to mind is if you tell me that, wow, Chris, you almost don't look autistic, you could pretty much pass for a regular person. That's not a compliment. In fact, I could go further and say, no, saying that I could almost pass for normal, that's not a compliment because normal people suck. I wouldn't quite go that far because, like I said, some of my best friends are neurotypicals, but still, it's there are a lot of people, roughly in kind of my region of the spectrum, who are kind of at that really awkward midpoint of being passing enough for neurotypical so that people can have the same expectations for them as they have for the general population, but just autistic enough to really struggle to meet those expectations. And I know that in saying that, I'm almost confusing being autistic with being incapable. They do not mean the same thing. But as I said earlier, being autistic in a world full of non-autistic people, it's kind of like being a cat in a world run by dogs. There's nothing wrong with being a cat, but the dogs will point out your faults. So yeah, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, and it's a really, really obvious bit of advice, but please don't expect even your high-functioning, bloody hell, I hate that phrase. Oh yeah, I can say bloody hell, that's another British, because bloody hell, I hate the phrase as high-functioning. That is also a load of bollocks. Yeah, sorry, I'm kind of venting out personal frustrations there, but can't you see how cathartic it is? Anyway, so yeah, even with your most high-functioning students, please don't assume that they will present as neurotypical. A lot of masking is involved. A lot of pretending to understand the rules so you can play by them and not get judged. A lot of that is involved. And so I just came across a very curious case here. Okay, done. Not solved the whole thing, just done the cross at the bottom. Again, getting distracted. These are great fidget toys, by the way, and they're fantastic for helping me concentrate, which is something I'll get to in a bit, as long as I don't get completely nerd sniped by them. But yeah, try not to make your students a second-rate neurotypical child. Encourage them to be a first-rate autistic child. And don't try not to assume that a successful autistic child will look the same the other side of the screen as a successful neurotypical child. Next one, what doesn't help? Demanding eye contact. And yes, this even counts with screens. Now, personally, I'm completely fine looking into that camera right there. I know it's, a bunch of you are looking at me in the eyes right now, and this feels completely fine because I can't see any eyeballs. I, personally, I'm completely fine with that. I have, however, since lockdown, communicated with lots of autistic people over Skype who really need to look away from me because it still feels that you still get the same anxiety from that camera as you do with a pair of eyes. And I think there are two reasons why I personally and a big bunch of other autistic people struggle with eye contact. Well, leaving aside the fact that I don't really see the necessity of it, so I don't think it really achieves anything. I think people only do it because everyone else is doing it. But anyway, the two reasons why I personally struggle with this is partly it's a bit of an anxiety thing or a apprehension thing because when I look into someone's eyes, it feels like a huge invasion of privacy, to be honest. And it feels like they're staring into the very depths of my soul, and I'm afraid they might find something they don't like, and I'm staring into the pits of their soul, and it feels like I'm being really rude by doing that to them. It feels really rude when I look at people in the eyes. I just hope they're not offended. One little side point. The reason why I do think a bit of it is anxiety related is because I've learned in recent years I've absolutely no trouble having eye contact, even extended eye contact with the children I know, the students who I work with. I can maintain eye contact with my students with absolutely no problem whatsoever. With people my age or older, I do struggle. And after a lot of reflection, I think the conclusion I've reached is young people have never damaged me. The biggest damage that has been done to me has not been by teenagers melting down and hitting the walls. It's been by very mature, responsible professional adults who are saying, don't worry, Chris, it's fine, and then waiting until my back is turned. Those are the people who have made me afraid of people. So maybe it really is an anxiety thing why I personally struggle with eye contact if it's my age or older. But also the other reason, this goes to what I was saying about concentration. If you ask me to look at you in the eyes extensively, then I'll be focusing so much on looking at you in the eyes that I'll completely forget to concentrate on what the hell you're saying. And that's better. It really is that. The best way I can possibly phrase it is this. You can either have my eye contact or you can have my concentration. You cannot have both. You're just going to have to decide which one means the most to you. So, yeah, if you find a student who's looking away, please don't assume that they're not listening. In fact, they are probably listening a lot more if they're playing with some kind of fidget toy over here and looking away from the screen. They're probably listening far more than the neurotypical child who is looking right at the screen but is using it to play Minecraft and you can't see. You know what? There are actually parallels to that in real life. If I'm if I'm looking away and you're talking to me, I'm looking over here and I'm concentrating on every word you're saying and I'm memorizing every word you're saying, that is considered rude. Whereas all I need to do in order to be polite is look at you and go, oh yeah. Yeah. And not actually listen to a word, just make those grunting noises and look at you in the face, and that is considered polite. So yeah, the child who's looking away is possibly, okay, well, no, some of us do daydream pathologically. I was one of them as a child. But give us the benefit of the doubt. Because the third thing that I think doesn't really help that much is, and it's difficult to say this without feeling like patronizing or questioning people's professional integrity and so on, but expressing or projecting our own frustrations. The thing is, I get it. We are frustrated. We are scared. And the system sucks. It just doesn't make any sense, and the advice changes, especially in Britain. The advice changes depending on the phases of the... Actually, no, not even the phases of the moon, because it's even faster than that. The moon takes 28 days to change. Government guidance takes about 24 hours. And yeah, you could probably tell by the way I'm expressing myself, there's so much frustration among us, but it's our responsibility to make sure that we handle it in a healthy way. Notice that I'm saying we handle it in a healthy way, not that we hide it from the students. They must not know we're frustrated. For some students, that might help. Pretending that you're not frustrated at all might actually help those students. But if you're feeling frustrated, make sure you've got someone to talk to about it, and so on and so on. My personal approach is kind of the opposite. I had a very emotional week last week, and I decided, you know what, I'm a very transparent person anyway, and also I want to have, and I do have, that really trusting relationship with the students. So I just openly let them know, yeah, I'm struggling this week. One of the reasons I did that was to build up that trusting relationship. It's something that I would have been a bit more hesitant to do in mainstream, but with the nurturing approach that you generally have in special education, I do feel more able to do that. But also, I was a little bit conscious of the risk of me snapping at a student because I am frustrated, and the student thinking, oh, that must be something that I did wrong. So yeah, I get it. We are so frustrated, and there's a lot to be frustrated about. So I'd say we're right to be frustrated. But let's make sure we are expressing our frustrations in a way that don't run the risk of making a student feel really self-conscious. Now, I'm probably running over time already, so I'll go to, well, no, I won't speed through it. We end up with 10 minutes for questions, and we end up with 10 minutes for questions. I'm very glad to see you nodding. Thank you very much. So what might help? First off, adjusting expectations. And I know that sounds like a huge euphemism. Like, I'm a teacher, I know my way around euphemisms. When you say that a child is interesting, then we know what the word interesting means. So adjusting expectations, I'm not using that as a euphemism for lowering expectations. I'm saying see your expectations as something that can be based around context, that can be adapted based on what your students are going through. Now, theoretically, that can mean raising or lowering expectations, but in this situation, I think that we do kind of need to be a bit pragmatic here. We need to recognize that with online learning in this particular year, we're probably not going to reach the same standards of education that we will with face-to-face learning. Like, in terms of how humans interact with each other, we're starting off on the back foot. And personally, I think if people aim or are told to aim by the senior staff to exactly the same standards, then that's actually really damaging. It must be really damaging to the staff's mental health as well. So anyway, what I'm not saying is lower your expectations. Your students aren't going to achieve that much. That is not the learning point in this. What I'm saying is lead with compassion. Put compassion first. Adjust your expectations based on how much your students can mentally cope with, especially if they're autistic, because, well, let's be honest, we're in a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic. 200,000 Americans are dead. Old men are yelling at each other on the screen about what they think the best way to run the country is, and even from the other side of the ocean, it's stressing me out. And also, we've got an incompetent government as well, so I can completely empathise. But and also, not all of us are getting out of this alive. So with all of that in mind, I can entirely empathise with anyone who feels so stressed that they find it difficult to learn. And if I go into that thinking, right, I want us to learn this, this, and this, then I'm not going to be surprised if they don't learn anything. If I lead with, so how are you feeling? Then, you know what, even then, they might actually not learn anything from the lesson depending on their own stress levels. But it's better for them to learn nothing with supportive, nurturing staff than to not learn anything with staff who are entirely concerned about how much of the curriculum they delivered. So, yeah, in fact, I feel like a traitor to my own kind saying this as an educator, but just to elaborate on that point, there is a lot for me to teach in the mathematics curriculum that has to fit into a very short amount of time. For example, just today, I finished a 2-week module on ratios. Now, I planned it originally, so, okay, lesson 1, they do this, lesson 2, they do 6, they do this, all the way to 6 lessons. And it felt like a whistle-stop tour of, well, bear in mind, this was face-to-face, by the way. This was not online only. This was actually me in the same room as the students, just to put it into context. But it felt like the temptation was there on me as a teacher to think, okay, well, you've only kind of semi-understood the first lesson, but we need to move on to the second lesson now. Okay, you've only kind of understood this, but we need to move on to the third lesson now. So they end up doing 6 lessons as I planned, but not really learning that much from them. And I've had to make peace with the fact that the best thing I could do as a teacher, perhaps, is stay on those first 3 lessons and let the other 3 lessons go. Because pragmatically, it is better for them to understand half the curriculum than to have zero understanding of the whole of the curriculum. If you need to slow down the pace, in fact, yeah, this is actually the second point I was going to make. If you have to slow down the pace, then slow down the pace unashamedly, because the objective is for the students to learn, not for you to cover the entire curriculum. And yeah, the total measure of the children's progress will be how much they know rather than how much the professional can write on a lesson plan that they have done. And that's something that is very difficult for me to admit, but for the students' sake, I've had to just make peace with that. Anyway, second point, allowing students to use their own methods and go at their own pace. Yeah, in terms of using their own methods, I'm going to try not to go on too much of a rant about the British School Inspector framework here, but one thing that I really hated about mainstream education, well, not so much education, but the way we're told to teach, and I imagine it's the same in America as well, is that all schools are supposed to teach exactly the same methods to all of the students. Like, this is the one way to teach multiplication. This is the one way to teach addition, and so on and so on. And it doesn't matter about neuroplasticity or different learning styles or anything like that. No, this is the one way that you must teach all students. And I know so many people who, if they've been, by the way, they change their mind every couple of years, by the way. So this outstanding method of teaching multiplication 2 years later gets completely thrown out and replaced with a different one, which in turn gets thrown out by a different one, and the circle of life continues. And the amount of people I know who could have been really good at maths if they'd been a few years older or a few years younger, if they won the roulette wheel of being in school at the time where their favoured method for maths, I say maths because I'm British and I speak the language correctly, where their favoured method was seen as the right method. One great thing I like about teaching in special education is standing in front of my class of students and saying, okay, there are about half a dozen different ways of getting the answer to this question right. Within reason, I don't care which method you use. Your brain, your method. And I do have to use the phrase within reason for that, because I work with autistic teenagers who love taking the mick and are very literal. So, like 68 plus 31. Okay, I'll draw 68 tally marks here. I'll draw 31, and then I'll go 1, 2, 3. You said we could use any method, Chris. And yeah, so within reason, use whichever method works for you. But yes, the more flexible you can be, and this applies to screen learning, it applies to face-to-face learning, but especially in these times where people are substantially more stressed than normal, allow people, be sympathetic to other people's choices of method, and if they need more time, give them more time. And finally, sympathy. It's kind of an extension of compassion and the value of compassion in times where everyone is struggling. Everyone knows that everyone is struggling, but yeah, a lot of sympathy goes a long way. And so the reason I put that as the third point is to make the point that we have an opportunity here. they say that the pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity, the optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. The world may have gone to absolute crap, but there are opportunities here. What we have right now with our very vulnerable students, even if the world were completely autism-friendly, they would still by definition be considered vulnerable because they're young people, they're still developing and so on. But what we have for these learners is the opportunity to demonstrate the same level of sympathy that we would want them to have for others when they one day become the grown-ups and they are the ones who choose what kind of approach to take to the next generation. So, only about 7 minutes behind schedule. That was the end of the talk. Yep. Quick summary of the points. Children in general struggle with online learning because of the personal element is gone. There's a constant reminder that you're not actually seeing the people. You're just kind of teased with this fake socializing. And also, unless your lessons are really interactive, it just feels like watching TV. With autistic children, the problem is amplified by possibly sensory issues, but by the fact that they're using their personal space, their personal universe for their work universe, and the expectations, unless you're really good at setting them out, are either unclear or difficult to adapt to. What doesn't help are, well, again, preaching to the choir, just expecting autistic children to behave like neurotypical children just because it's more convenient. Not suggesting you would do that, it's just a problem that's so easy to fall into. Demanding eye contact, even if it's eye contact with a screen, and expressing our own frustrations in a way that could be problematic. Again, I'm not saying don't express your frustrations. I'm saying give them some context as to where those, make them know it's not personal to them. And what does help? Adjusting expectations depending on the context and how much your learners are struggling. Lead with compassion, not with the curriculum, which I feel quite naughty saying that. I feel like a school inspector is going to knock on the door and like charge me with crimes against education, but screw it. We have to lead with compassion, especially if our students are vulnerable, and demonstrating the same level of sympathy that you would want them to have when they see another struggling person. And finally, of course, using your own methods and working at your own pace. So that's it. I'd like to open myself to any reasonable questions you may have. And again, children like me, the word I use, the word reasonable in that sentence, because at their age, I would have been asking lots of questions about Sonic the Hedgehog. But yeah, thanks very much for listening and having me in Pennsylvania. And if this talk helps just one autistic student, then I'm going to be really disappointed because I'm really hoping for more than that. Okay, over to you.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much. I feel like for me, like the two big takeaways I had, that I said I wanted to actually write down your words, because when you said, don't try to make a second-rate neurotypical child, make a first-rate autistic child. That's like, to me, it makes so much sense, and we should have all been saying that all along, but it's just, to me, that was just so powerful. And it was, I don't know, just to me, so important. And of course, leading with compassion. Absolutely. I mean, I think compassion for the students, especially now. I think we all need to have compassion for ourselves. The teachers need to understand that they're going through, a time that they're not used to. Parents need to give themselves some compassion on how they are trying to deal with, this whole new world that we're living in. But we do have a lot of people that are, I think, excited to hear from you about some of their questions. Okay. Let me see here. The first one was wondering how to motivate a child who is very capable of doing grade level work, but chooses not to and wants to be in preschool instead. She is 9 years old in 4th grade, and she also notes that she is a foster child that she's only had for 7 months.
Okay. First things first, Judy, thank you very much for adding that context there then, because that completely changes the answer that I might otherwise have given, because context is just so important. And knowing that, well, first off, knowing your age is important. You'd be surprised how many people ask me questions about how to best provide for their child, but don't tell me how old they are. But also, foster child, relatively new foster child as well. What I'm hearing here, and again, I'm trying not to make too many assumptions about a child who I've never met, but what I'm hearing here is that she really, really wants to stay inside her comfort zone. It might be the kind of thing that's interpreted as laziness. Like I've got a student who I'm teaching tomorrow morning who will mess about in lessons and not engage with the work. And it's not because he's being a grumpy teenager. It's because he's struggling, but he's with his peers and he does not want his peers to know that he's struggling. So if someone is appearing lazy or disengaged, it's not necessarily because that they're being unwilling. And what I'd guess there is that it might be an anxiety thing, not necessarily anxiety disorder thing. I don't want to be diagnostic here or anything, but it may be nerves. Like, am I really capable of fourth grade stuff? Am I ready for everyone's expectations of what a fourth grade child is supposed to be? So I could go down the teaching route and say, maybe you should use these pedagogical methods to increase your child's understanding of this, that, and the other. But maybe the best place to start is right down at the basement layer of how do I make this child as comfortable as possible and as confident as possible. And this could be down to the one that just occurred to me right now, just looking at the dining room table. What if at dinner time, just say, can you lay the table for me, please? And if she is the one laying the table, putting down nice forks, mats, and everything, even little things like that, put the voice in her head. I am capable of laying the table. I am capable of this. I'm capable of that. I'm capable of that. And the bigger the list of things that she considers herself capable of, the more confident she'll feel stepping outside her comfort zone. Bear in mind that outside of her comfort zone might be what other people expect from her, like fourth grade. That may be an expectation for other people, but for it may be outside the comfort zone. So yeah, I know that as a teacher, I'm probably supposed to be giving all this advice relating to teaching, but really, I think it is about looking after her well-being and expanding her comfort zone in non-academic contexts as much as possible, because that will make the academic stuff easier to access.
Absolutely. I agree. I mean, you can't expect a child to excel or even do academics if their emotional needs are, not met, for sure.
Absolutely.
And for being a foster parent, I mean, good for you, especially special needs foster parent. I'm sorry. Another question says, I think your godson shares many of the characteristics as my 13-year-old son with autism, ADHD, and anxiety. Any tips that he has used to be successful or even at this point less overwhelmed by virtual learning? Avoidance is a really big issue for him.
Unfortunately for you, my godson is now in face-to-face school because all schools here were forced to open. Unless there are literally COVID cases in the school, all students are supposed to be in attendance. So, unfortunately, online learning didn't work for my godson. So, I'm wondering if there's anything else in the question that I can actually address usefully. 8 tips, these used to be successful. We're in this point. Honestly, I can't give much in the way of useful advice in relation to virtual learning. I think, again, a lot of what I would say to that is kind of similar to the answer we gave to the last question about what are the areas outside of virtual learning that could also be addressed. Because if he's finding it completely overwhelming, to me personally and to a lot of the students, the things I get overwhelmed by aren't overwhelming if I'm dealing with them in isolation. Like a traffic jam on the way to work is not overwhelming by itself. But a traffic jam on the way to work whilst my godson's struggling and my students been punching the walls, and also I've got this huge backlog of messages, and also is Underdog 3 going to get published or not, and why on earth is the publisher leaving? I've got all these things. Suddenly they end up getting snowballed into this really big thing. It's so difficult to pick apart as well. That's one thing I've been working with one of my students, really trying to encourage him to catch yourself in the act of combining all your worries together. One of this might be a worry about your home life. One of these might be something about your school life. Something may be just something that's annoyed you on that particular morning. Try and separate them because they're easier to deal with. So, yeah, this is probably the best advice now to give, because I can't really give any examples of how my godson managed to succeed in online learning, because he didn't. But one thing that can make it a less overwhelming experience is addressing all of the little anxieties elsewhere, because the less overwhelmed the little things are, the less things there are for things to snowball and get overwhelming, which can make virtual learning inaccessible.
Yeah, absolutely. So Janelle says, she said, thank you so much for addressing this topic. She's finding herself trying to force her son to be still, stop moving, to pay attention. She's still trying to get used to his diagnosis. And then she said she wants to know how to help him with that when she's not frustrated or frustrating him.
Okay. Got to admit, the first thing that came to my mind when trying to force him to be still, stop moving, paying attention, it's almost a rhetorical question. How do you know that he isn't paying attention when he's moving and he's not being still? He could, for example, people with ADHD, and me fiddling around with this cube, like I said earlier, that was helping me concentrate. That was actively focusing my mind. So it might be the case, again, I'm not a diagnostician, we're not going to just assume that your lad has ADHD, but even with non-ADHD autistic people, just the opportunity to fiddle around with something can be a tremendous help. So the first question I'd ask you to consider is, are you absolutely sure that the fiddling around and everything isn't actually helping him concentrate? Because if I had to put this down, be completely still and concentrate, I'll probably just end up daydreaming about 10 seconds later.
Fair enough. So we have another one. My 6-year-old son can't remain seated during virtual learning, and it takes a lot of time to get his attention. He also does not respond to most of the questions about reading comprehension. What strategies would you recommend? Okay.
By can't remain seated, is it needs to stand up and look at the screen once in a while, or is it needs to just run out the room once in a while? Because one of those will be an obstacle to learning and one of them will not. If he can't remain seated because he wants to run out the room, then obviously he's not engaging with the learning. But if he's just standing up to look at the screen, let him do so. There was a Skype consultation I had with a family in Illinois a couple of months ago, and one of the things that they said was, how do I get my child to concentrate on his homeschool maths when he's like upside down on the floor, balanced against the wall? And I said, well, you grab the maths books, you put yourself upside down, and you learn upside down with him. Like, adapt it to him, try not to get a very, very young child to adapt to you. And yeah, okay, next bit. Doesn't respond most of the question about reading comprehension. Reading comprehension is very often a struggling point for autistic children and adults as well, to some extent, because a lot of it involves reading between the lines. Like Barry had wrinkles across his brow, eyebrows are going down, and he was grinding his teeth. So, and the question to that is, how is Barry feeling? But it doesn't say how he's feeling. Of course, if you know how to read between the lines, oh, those are the facial expressions that are made by people when they're annoyed. But if you don't know that, or if you're answering the question in a very literal way, and you're looking for, okay, where does it say how he's feeling? Then yeah, it can be quite difficult. And yeah, in terms of strategies, I've got to admit that is a difficult one. But I'd say overall, and this is so much related to reading comprehension, it's related to literacy in general. The more time you can spend reading with a child, the better that they'll be, the more motivated that they'll be with learning literacy. And if it's comprehension that you want to focus on, one thing that I've done when I've listened to children read is I'll read through a page with them, and then I'll pause at the end and then make some kind of comment about what's happened. I think the way you're supposed to teach it is by finishing a page and then saying, "So, how? What is this family of ducks doing right now?" Basically, you were listening, weren't you? But I don't think that's the most encouraging way of doing it. I'd say you'd read to the end of the page and then think, "Oh, I hope those ducks get to where they're going to," and so actually have a discussion about what is happening on the page. Because a lot of the time, autistic children, and again, children in general, can be pitch perfect at reading the words, but that's just a sight thing and an interpretation thing. Comprehending the whole thing is something that I think you're more likely to succeed at if you're having discussions about what is being written down, rather than just, here is a page of symbols, please interpret these symbols correctly.
Yeah. It's a great answer. The reading comprehension is definitely a challenge for a lot of these students. Well, that seems to be the end of our questions right now.
I'll jump in. I actually have a question, Chris. So a lot of the students that I work with are having quite a bit of difficulty with organizing, like, you were saying about the expectations and making sure that they know what the expectations are. A lot of the students I'm working with are having a hard time just organizing that so that they can keep track of the expectations, especially when I get to some of my older kids that are in they have different teachers for every class, for maybe, they might have 5 or 6 different teachers a day. Do you have any suggestions for strategies that might help them with organizing what the expectations of them are?
I suppose the one that strikes me first is having something visual, which I know is a very, it might be a very obvious suggestion, but an actual written down timetable, chronological order. Monday, geography, Mr. Such and Such. A second lesson, history, Mr. Such and Such, and so on and so on. Having something visual, whether it's literally just words, whether it's color coded or something that is accessible to them, so they can see what the day holds for them, and also a little bit of routine as well. For example, when I was at secondary school, last thing before I went to bed, I'd check my timetable, I'd get my exercise books and put them in my bag in the order that I was doing the subjects. That was just part of the routine. And once it's established, and by the way, establishing the routines can kind of be a bit of trial and error. You may find that this really, really great idea you had at the start of the year might have completely fallen apart halfway through October. That's okay, just experiment with a different one. I've, as an adult, I've got 4 jobs. I've got this, my speaking engagement work. I've got my underdogs work. I've got my special needs tuition that I've been talking mostly about tonight, and I've got running a page of 127,000 followers and a backlog of like 40-ish messages once very often. It would be so easy for me to completely get overwhelmed, and I do get overwhelmed. And I've spent years and years trying to find the right routine, the right strategies to just keep on top of everything. And about once a year, I completely change it. Like, oh, okay, that doesn't work anymore. But actually, that's kind of okay because, well, it worked for a year, didn't it? So, yeah, come up with a routine or come up with something visual that works. Stick with it for as long as it is useful. But if you get the feeling it's not going to be that useful anymore, don't be afraid to experiment with something else. And that might actually help the child learn things about themselves, learn things about how their own brain can access things and so on.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I actually have a question for you too.
Sure.
So I teach a class actually to our future special education teachers
Cool.
about autism. I would love to just hear what is your advice to them as they are kind of entering the field, working with these, kids. What would your advice to our newest teachers be?
Lead with compassion and listen to autistic adults.
Great advice. I love
Yeah,
that.
so compassion. Well, again, it's a preaching to the choir thing, but I would make a point of making that the very first thing. Going into the profession to put knowledge in people's heads, that is one thing. But again, you're never going to be able to do that unless the child feels safe to learn around you, unless you feel personally motivated to do the best you can for that child's well-being. And listening to autistic adults, the amount of stuff that teachers are taught about autism, I'm going to use it just one more time. It's a complete load of bollocks. And let's say, for example, do you say autistic person or do you say person with autism?
So there is like a debate about this. I don't know what the right answer is.
Okay, right. So if you're a non-autistic professional teaching non-autistic teachers how to teach autistic students, then you'll be saying person with autism because they're not their autism diagnosis. Well, actually, no, 100% of me is autistic. I'm not a person with autism any more than I'm a person with left-handedness. The reason I'm a left-handed person, not a person with left-handedness, is because I don't think my left-handedness is so dreadful that it needs to be pushed to the back of the sentence like it's not a part of me, really. But yeah, that's one thing that if you only listen to the professionals in your field, you'll be led to think, I'm just taking the language debate as one particular example. There's ABA as well. Bloody hell, ABA. That's, dog training and grooming combined into one is a very, very dark topic. But if you only stick with the opinions within your profession, then you'll be led to believe that person with autism is the most respectful thing you can say to an autistic person. If you listen to autistic adults, then you'll know better. So yeah, lead with compassion and listen to the people who have been there, done that, and have more personalized experience than the people teaching. And I just realized I'm talking directly to someone who teaches these, but I promise I'm not trying to undermine your teaching.
No.
But at the same time, it is important to listen to us.
No, this is the exact reason that, Sandy found you, which I'm so grateful, but this is why we wanted you to be the person speaking on this topic, because really right now, nobody knows because it's so new, but so the people that are going to know the most is the autistic people. See, I can do it the right way now.
But I think that your point was really good that, for those of us who have, been in either education or psychology or whatever our background is, I almost feel like I'm reprogramming myself because I'm learning to say autistic person. And sometimes other professionals will look at us weird when we say it because it feels to them, like you said, like I'm the one that's being derogatory or whatever for not saying it that way. And
even I get corrected once in a while. You can't say that. It's offensive to yourself.
Yeah.
I'm a big boy now. I can get offended by myself if I want to. Don't need your help with it.
Right. Yeah, so I've been trying then to, bring up the points that you make about that to other professionals and kind of use that, those examples that you just gave to show why the way they're approaching it is actually the offensive way to say it. So, I think
the well-meaning type of it. So I think we do need to be diplomatic when it's like, if someone says, I'm really struggling, my 5-year-old is just diagnosed, he is now a child with autism, and I'm completely lost. The worst thing you can say is, he is not a person with autism. You got to be nurturing, because people in general where especially if they feel somewhat motivated to help vulnerable people or teach children with special needs, they will do what they believe is right, what they believe is respectful. So yeah, if people are open to learning, then be diplomatic about it. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this was great. I mean, I feel like I learned a lot.
It was fun, wasn't it?
Yes, it absolutely was. And I'm just going to make this homework for my students. It'll be fine. Sandy, did we want to share about the upcoming webinar?
Yeah, so for those of you who are watching this on the recording or who are still with us, we do have, and it actually is a perfect segue because it very much ties in with some of the things you were saying, Chris. Our next webinar will be on October 12th. Unfortunately, the link is not posted on the Facebook page yet, but it will be in the next couple of days, so keep an eye out. But the topic of the next set of webinars is how to prevent Zoom fatigue and really make your lessons interactive. So it very much ties to what you said about the difference between watching TV and playing a video game. And how do you present your lessons as if it's a video game instead of a TV show. And we're actually going to have a teacher, so the first night will be all of the theory. That will be on October 12th, so she'll be presenting how she teaches. And then on October 19th, she will actually be presenting a sample lesson so that you can see it and see the strategies she uses rather than just hearing about them. So again, keep your eye on our Facebook page. We're hoping to have those links posted in the next day or two.
Yep. All right. Well, I think again, I'd like to thank Chris again. I mean, I feel like you've exceeded our expectations and the information that you shared. And
does that mean you underestimated me?
No, no. I mean, I just truly enjoyed your humor, and I do feel like I'm super boring now. I'm feeling a little bit bad about myself, but that's okay.
We need better jokes, Kristen. We gotta come up with better jokes.
Well, he's called us all boring.
I was sorry, was that you taking me literally?
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's that really, really autistic problem of taking people literally and not interpreting jokes correctly.
But no, I appreciated the way that you presented this important information in just a way that it just felt, I don't know, very friendly and natural, which was the point. And I'm glad that we had such a great attendance. We will be, for those that are here, we will be posting the link to the video. We'll send it out to everyone who's registered in case they weren't able to make it. And then we'll be posting it on our Facebook page as well.
I am actually going to, we just got a question. I am actually going to get the link for the Facebook page and post it in the chat so that you'll be able to find it. If I can figure out how to do this. Okay. So that is our Facebook page. We don't have a website right now, but everything will be posted on the Facebook page. And I forget what else I was going to say. It completely was gone. So
yeah. Well, all of our previous webinars are on that Facebook page.
Yes.
And we have some additional webinars that we did through the Autism Center. But what I'll do is, and we have those on our YouTube channel also, but I'll post that link on this Facebook page so everyone would have access to that too.
Yep.
All right, I think that's everything. I'm going to stop recording.